You got what you wanted: the job, the apartment, the relationship that looked correct on paper, maybe even the body, the social circle, the vacation, the version of your life that, when you describe it to someone else, sounds like something worth having. And yet, there is something wrong. You can't quite name it. It doesn't fit neatly into any category of suffering you were taught to recognize. You're not depressed, or at least you don't think you are. You're not in crisis. Nothing is broken. Nothing is missing in any way you could explain to another person without sounding ungrateful or lost, or like someone who simply doesn't know how to be satisfied. But it's there, that hollow place, that strange, sourceless ache that arrives uninvited in the quiet moments. In the car after a social event, you smiled all the way through. In the 3 seconds after you put your phone down before you pick it back up. In the middle of the night, when the performance is over and you are finally, terrifyingly alone with yourself, you feel empty, and your life looks fine. And that combination, that specific, maddening gap between the life you have and the aliveness you expected it to produce, that is not a random malfunction. That is a signal. And the fact that you are here, watching this, means some part of you already knows it. The philosopher Arthur Schopenhauer, a man who understood human suffering with a ruthlessness few thinkers have matched, described the fundamental structure of conscious human life as a pendulum. We swing, he said, between two states that we cannot escape and cannot reconcile: pain and boredom. When we lack what we desire, we suffer the sharp, urgent ache of want. When we finally acquire it, the desire dissolves, and in its place arrives something quieter, more corrosive. A dull, creeping sense that this was not enough, that whatever we reached for has already lost its shape in our hands. And then we want again, and the pendulum swings again, and the cycle, this grinding, relentless oscillation, is, Schopenhauer argued, simply what it means to be a human being moving through time. But here is what Schopenhauer could not account for. Here is the particular modern wrinkle that makes this ancient problem so much more disorienting to live inside of. We now have an entire infrastructure built to convince us the pendulum has stopped. We have been sold the idea, through advertising, through social media, through the relentless gospel of self-optimization, that the right combination of achievements, relationships, and material conditions will produce a permanent state of satisfaction. That there exists a version of your life in which you will wake up every morning and feel, without effort or doubt or hollow exception, genuinely fine. Not just fine the way you tell people you are, actually fine, full, present, alive to your own existence in a way that requires no performance. And so you assembled the life. Piece by piece, decade by decade, you gathered the components you were told would constitute a good existence. You earned them. You built them. You arranged them carefully. And then you stood back and waited for the feeling that was supposed to come. And it didn't come. Or it came briefly, for a week after the promotion, for a month into the relationship, for the first few days in the new apartment. And then it retreated, as it always retreats, leaving you standing in the middle of a life that looks, by every external measure, like success, and feeling, in the private country of your inner experience, like something essential is still missing. This is not ingratitude. This is not a character flaw. This is not evidence that you are broken or that you chose wrong, or that you need a better strategy. What you are experiencing has a name in depth psychology, and the name matters, because naming something accurately is the first violent act of resistance against it. What you are experiencing is the consequence of living at a profound distance from yourself. Carl Jung gave us the most precise map we have for understanding this. He called it the persona, the social mask, the constructed, curated presentation of self that we wear not out of deception exactly, but out of an ancient and entirely human need, the need to belong, to be accepted, to move through the world without being destroyed by what other people think of us. The persona, Jung explained, is not inherently dangerous. Every functioning human being requires one. We cannot walk into a job interview and say everything we actually think. We cannot meet a stranger and immediately expose our deepest fears. The mask is necessary. The mask, in limited doses, is adaptive. It is a tool for navigating the gap between who we are inside and what the social world can tolerate. The problem, and this is the thing Jung spent his entire career trying to make people understand, is not the mask. The problem is when you forget you are wearing one. When the performance becomes so practiced, so automatic, so deeply embedded in your daily existence, that you lose the ability to distinguish between the face you show the world and the face you actually have underneath it. When the mask fuses with the flesh, when you begin to relate to your own curated self-image as if it were the totality of who you are. And everything that doesn't fit, every inconvenient emotion, every unacceptable desire, every part of you that refuses to look presentable, gets pushed further and further out of consciousness until you are a persona walking around inside a life with almost no contact with the actual person that persona was built to protect. Now imagine what the internet has done to this dynamic. That moment was a long time ago. Because we have been trained, slowly and thoroughly and with the best intentions, to manage our inner experience rather than inhabit it, to optimize our emotional presentation rather than trust our actual emotional reality. We have become so sophisticated at performing wellness that we have largely lost the ability to know whether we are actually well, and we have mistaken the performance of a satisfying life for the experience of one. This is the collective hallucination, the shared, culturally enforced agreement that if your life looks fine, you are fine. That external coherence equals internal wholeness. That the absence of visible crisis is the same as the presence of genuine vitality. It is not. And somewhere behind the persona you have spent decades constructing and maintaining, somewhere in the part of you that goes quiet and a little strange in the middle of the night, you already know that. Jung called it the shadow. Not a metaphor, not a poetic device, a clinical term for a real psychological structure, the repository of everything you have rejected about yourself. Every trait, every impulse, every aspect of your nature that was deemed, by your family, by your culture, by the particular version of acceptability you were raised inside, as too much, too dark, too inconvenient, too strange, too powerful, too vulnerable, or simply too real to be permitted in polite company. From the earliest years of your life, you were taught, mostly without anyone intending to teach you anything harmful, to perform a selective self. The anger was unacceptable, so you buried the anger. The ambition was unseemly, so you buried the ambition. The grief was uncomfortable for other people, so you learned to perform recovery rather than move through loss. The desire for something radically different from what you had. The life you felt calling to you from somewhere you couldn't quite locate. That desire was impractical, irresponsible, self-indulgent. So you set it aside. You told yourself you would come back to it later, and later never came. And the desire didn't die. It just went underground. This is the crucial thing about the shadow. The thing that changes everything once you actually understand it. The parts of yourself you exile do not disappear. They do not wither and dissolve because you have refused to acknowledge them. They accumulate. They consolidate. They grow heavy with the pressure of your continued refusal to look at them. And they express themselves, not always in dramatic ways, not always in ways you can immediately identify as the return of the repressed. Sometimes the shadow expresses itself in the quality of your restlessness, that formless, directionless agitation that arrives when everything is technically fine and something still feels wrong. Sometimes it expresses itself in the patterns of your self-destruction, the choices you make in the small hours, the relationships you keep choosing despite knowing better, the ways you undermine yourself at the exact moment when the thing you actually want begins to become real. And sometimes, perhaps most commonly, perhaps most painfully, it expresses itself as emptiness, as a hollow ache that has no identifiable source, because its source is not a thing that happened to you. Its source is a thing you have been doing to yourself for years, quietly, with the best of intentions. The emptiness is not the absence of meaning. The emptiness is the presence of everything you have refused to become, pressing against the inside of the life you agreed to perform instead. Viktor Frankl, who survived conditions that stripped human existence down to its absolute core, wrote that the primary human motivation is not pleasure, and it is not power. It is meaning. And the deepest human suffering, not the suffering of external circumstances, which can be borne with extraordinary grace when meaning is present, but the suffering that hollows a person out slowly from the inside, comes from the absence of meaning. From living a life that does not correspond to anything genuinely true inside you. The philosopher's prison, he called it. The cage without bars. The life that looks correct and functions correctly and generates all the appropriate signals of adequacy, and that a human soul simply cannot live inside with any genuine sense of being alive. Your shadow is the accumulated weight of the self you didn't allow yourself to be, and the emptiness you feel, that persistent, sourceless, maddening vacancy at the center of an apparently satisfactory existence, is that weight making itself known. It is the shadow's hunger. It is the exiled self knocking. So what do you do with this? Not in the self-help sense, not in the 10-step program sense, not in the sense of, here is the technique that will resolve this discomfort and return you to a comfortable distance from your own interior. That is not what this is. And if you have been watching and recognizing something true in what has been said here, you already know that another strategy for managing the emptiness is not what you need. What you need, the only thing that has ever actually worked for anyone who has ever genuinely moved through this particular kind of suffering, is to stop. Stop running from the stillness. Stop filling every silence with a screen, a conversation, a project, a distraction, an optimization, a self-improvement plan that keeps you productively busy and safely distant from the one thing that frightens you more than failure: your own unmediated experience of being alive. Jung wrote, and this is perhaps the most honest and most difficult thing he ever said, that the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. Not the acceptable parts, not the presentable parts, the whole thing, including the parts that were buried because someone somewhere decided they were too much, including the anger and the grief and the ambition and the desire and the profound, impatient, barely contained sense that your life is supposed to mean something more than what it currently does. The shadow does not want to destroy you. This is the misunderstanding that keeps people from doing this work. The idea that looking at what has been buried is itself dangerous. That the suppressed parts of the self are suppressed for good reason, and that releasing them would produce chaos or collapse, or some version of you that no one, including yourself, could live with. But that is the persona talking. That is the mask's self-preservation mechanism. The shadow is not your enemy. The shadow is the part of you that refused to be completely erased. It is proof that something in you has been fighting all this time to remain real. The emptiness you feel is not evidence that you are insufficient. It is not a symptom of something wrong with your neurology, your discipline, or your gratitude. It is evidence that you are living at a distance from yourself. It is the body's way of broadcasting a signal that the conscious mind has been trained to ignore. It is the self, speaking in the only language left available to it after years of being told it isn't welcome. The language of absence, of hollow, of fine on the surface and profoundly unresolved underneath. And the beginning, not the solution, not the resolution, but the beginning, is simply to hear it. To stop interpreting the emptiness as a problem to be solved and start treating it as a message to be understood. To sit with the discomfort of your own interiority long enough for something true to surface. To allow the question that keeps arriving in the quiet to actually be asked and held and taken seriously. Whose life am I living? And the harder one, what part of me have I been trying not to be? Schopenhauer's pendulum never stops swinging, and Jung never promised you that integrating your shadow would make the pain go away. What he promised, what every serious thinker who has looked unflinchingly at the structure of human experience has eventually arrived at, is something both smaller and infinitely more valuable than the permanent satisfaction you were sold. He promised that the version of you who has made contact with the whole of their own nature, who has stopped performing a self and started inhabiting one, that version of you will suffer differently. Will move through the world in a fundamentally different register. Will feel the emptiness when it comes, not as a verdict on the life they have built, but as a compass pointing toward the life they haven't yet allowed themselves to want. The hollow feeling is not the end of something. It is the beginning of the question that could change everything if you are willing to stop running from the answer. The question is already in you. It has been there a long time. The only thing left is the courage to hear it.